We should have felt relief. We didn't. Jessica sat on the couch holding Noah like he might evaporate. Mr. Howell brought a towel I didn't need for my hands and left it on the coffee table, then stood awkwardly in the doorway until I thanked him and he nodded and shuffled away. The detective arrived. Questions, measured and patient. Did I have prior conflict? Did I have other evidence? Had I felt threatened? Did I want a restraining order? Yes, yes, yes. He asked if I wanted victim services. I almost laughed. I almost said, I used to be you. Instead, I said, please check our porch camera at 2:13 a.m. yesterday. There was an earlier chain. He wrote it down. He thanked me for my composure. He left. We sat in the new quiet. The chain, coiled in a plastic bag on the floor, looked like a dead snake. I wanted to throw it away, but it was evidence. Evidence must be kept. Noah fell asleep against Jessica's chest, breath settling into that sweet, even cadence that has healed more things than medicine. I watched them until my eyes burned. At 8:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. The voice was low, hurried. You're not safe. Who is this? Silence. Then, they're going to argue she acted within policy. They're going to say it was community security. They're going to say you endangered your own child by leaving him unattended for several minutes. They're going to pull the footage from your cameras and cut it to fit their timeline. Who is this? I repeated, a breath. A board member who still has a conscience. Click. I went cold. Jessica's head lifted. What? I told her. She closed her eyes and nodded like this had been inevitable. I went to the porch, sat on the top step, and stared at the rail where the chain had been. The paint was scuffed. My blood had dried in a faint brown crescent I would later scrub and still see every time I passed the spot. Across the street, Margaret's house was dark. The clubhouse lights were on. I called the regional office again. Left a voicemail this time because, of course, they didn't pick up after business hours. I said words like liability and evidence preservation and criminal complicity. I didn't threaten. It wasn't a threat. It was a map. At 10:03 p.m., the same minute the final warning arrived the night before. I heard movement, not outside, inside. Jessica gasped, "Danny!" I was on my feet before my brain finished the word. The back door. The lock unlatched. Noah wailed. Confusion more than fear. That soft, startled cry like somebody turned the world too quickly. I moved through the kitchen like a current, one hand reaching for the drawer where I keep nothing that will get me in trouble and everything that will buy me seconds. Flashlight, spray, phone. The back door stood open 3 inches. Outside, the night was dark in that suburban way where every third backyard is lit and every second one isn't. I stepped to the doorframe, listened. Nothing. Just sprinklers ticking far away and a single cicada complaining. I shut the door. I locked it. Checked the windows. Checked the baby. Checked Jessica's eyes. They were huge, shining, furious. I can't live like this, she whispered. The detective called back at 11:12 p.m. We've booked her for child endangerment and trespass. The neighbor who put the lock on confessed. He says she told him it was legal under the HOA's temporary restraint clause. Good, I said. It didn't feel good. There's a hearing in the morning for pretrial conditions. I suggest you come. And, he paused, they have a lawyer. The HOA, I mean. They're framing it as community safety. They're saying your child was unattended. He wasn't. I know, he said gently, but this is going to get worse before it gets better. I looked at my son asleep on my wife's chest, at the porch rail, at the bagged chain on the floor like a courtroom exhibit waiting to wake up. The detective cleared his throat. You said you were former law enforcement. You know how this goes, I do. You ready? I swallowed. I have to be. I hung up, went to the window, and watched the street until the sky lightened at the edges. I thought I knew grief. I thought I knew injustice. I'd been wrong. This wasn't about a chain. It was about a woman who believed her rules mattered more than a human child. It was about a system designed to protect power and call it order. In the morning, I'd put on a borrowed suit and stand in a courtroom with people who had never smelled their own blood on a porch rail. I would speak calmly while my insides shook. I would say the words, "Your Honor," like a prayer and a dare. And Margaret would finally see who I was. She had no idea I'd brought an army with me. Not guns, not badges, just the truth, captured in pixels and timestamps, and a neighborhood finally deciding which side of the street it stood on. No one was going to chain my child again. Not a woman with a clipboard, not an ordinance with a loophole, not a board with a pen. The turning point wasn't the lock snapping. It was the instant I knew that our grief was going to change something beyond our porch, beyond our house, beyond Maple Grove. I could feel it under my skin like heat before lightning. I kissed my wife's forehead. I switched off the baby monitor. I picked up the chain in its bag and my folder of exhibits. I didn't sleep. I didn't blink. I waited for the sun, because the next day we would walk into a room where they still thought this was about noise. And I would show them what noise really is when a father decides enough is enough. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and paper. Cold. Controlled. Like a place that eats emotion for breakfast and burps out procedure. Jessica's fingers locked through mine as we passed through security. Noah was at her sister's house. He'd cried when she left, and she'd cried harder. I told her we'd be back by lunch. I lied because I needed her to walk forward. Inside, the fluorescent light turned everyone gray. The bailiff called names. Margaret Langley stood 3 feet from me, pearls, pastel suit, hair perfect. The chain incident had made local news. She looked like someone heading to brunch, not a woman charged with endangering a child. The judge, a tall man with a weary face, looked over his glasses. People v. Langley pretrial hearing. Appearances? Her lawyer, a sharp man with silver cufflinks, spoke first. Robert Devane, for the defense, Your Honor. I rose. Daniel Cole, complainant and witness. The judge nodded. Proceed. Devane started soft, almost sympathetic. Your Honor, this is a case of misunderstanding amplified by emotion and social media. Mrs. Langley has served her community for 15 years. Her intent was neighborhood safety, not harm. I felt Jessica tense beside me. The judge's eyes shifted. Mr. Cole, the court has reviewed the statement of probable cause. I understand you have video evidence. Yes, sir. Let's see it. The clerk dimmed the lights. The projector hummed to life. On screen, my porch, 2:46 p.m., sunlight sharp. The carrier, my son. The chain, the neighbor's arm, quick and deliberate. Then Margaret's silhouette, unmistakable, handing over the lock moments before. Gasps rippled through the room. The judge's jaw tightened. Devane leaned forward. Your Honor, context. Sit down, counselor. He did. When the lights came back, I could see Margaret's face clearly for the first time since that day. Pale. Tight. A tremor in her hand as she smoothed an invisible wrinkle on her skirt. The judge spoke carefully. The evidence establishes probable cause for criminal trespass and endangerment. We'll proceed to arraignment. Jessica exhaled, a trembling sound halfway between relief and collapse. But Devane wasn't finished. Your Honor, if I may, Mr. Cole left his infant unattended, even momentarily. That constitutes negligence. My client's intent was protection, not harm. He said protection like it was holy. I rose again before the judge could answer. Your Honor, I never left my son unattended. I stepped 1 foot inside. He was in my sight. I'm a retired sergeant. I know the difference between a risk and a target. My voice echoed louder than I meant. The room went still. The judge looked at me for a long moment. Noted, Mr. Cole. Margaret's lawyer pressed on. We moved to dismiss on grounds of intent. The HOA's bylaws authorize temporary restraint of unattended property. Objects, I cut in, not people. The judge's gavel cracked once. Enough. Motion denied. Proceed to trial. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with whispers and phones. A reporter asked, Mr. Cole, do you think the HOA culture needs reform? I kept walking. No comment. Jessica looked up at me. She's not sorry. She will be, I said quietly. But I didn't believe it yet. That night I couldn't turn the lights off. The house felt too dark, too big. I sat in Noah's room, watched him sleep, listened to the white noise hum through the monitor like static from another world. I'd been shot at, stabbed once, seen people die in alleys and under bridges. None of it touched me like this, because those were strangers. This was home. The next morning, a letter slid under our door. No return address, just one sentence typed, You're destroying this community. Jessica found it first. She didn't say anything. She tore it into small pieces and dropped them in the trash. At noon, the detective called. The HOA board's distancing itself, but off record, Cole, they're nervous. They hired a PR firm. There's a talk of a settlement. I don't want money, I said. I figured. Then what do you want? An apology, on record, and reform. He chuckled softly. You're asking for a miracle. I've seen worse odds. 2 days before trial, Margaret showed up on my sidewalk. No one had told her to stay away, though the restraining order was pending. She stood where she'd always stood, hands folded, posture perfect. Jessica opened the curtains, froze. Danny, I stepped out. You're violating conditions. She smiled faintly. Not yet. I'm on the public easement. Say what you came to say. I want you to know, she said, I sleep fine. Good for you. People need rules, Mr. Cole. You, of all people, should understand that rules don't matter when you forget the people they're supposed to protect. Her eyes flashed. You think you're the hero here, but you moved into a community that didn't need saving. No, I said quietly. It needed waking up. She left without another word, but something in her expression, a flicker of doubt, maybe fear, told me the facade was cracking. The day of trial, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, neighbors, even board members. The air vibrated with attention. I took the stand, raised my right hand, swore the oath I'd heard 100 times. Tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but. And I did. I told them about the letters, the tags, the nails, the hearing, the seminar, the chain. I described the sound of the lock, snapping like a bone giving up. I didn't cry. I let the silence between sentences carry the weight. Devane tried to twist it. You admit you were angry? Yes. You confronted her publicly? Yes. You provoked hostility. I met his gaze. She chained my son. He looked away first. When Margaret took the stand, she kept her eyes forward. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook when she held up the HOA binder. I acted in the community's best interest. I regret the optics, but not the principle. Not the principle, I repeated under my breath. The prosecutor's final question cut through the courtroom. Mrs. Langley, do you consider a 3-month-old infant an item under HOA Ordinance 11C? Margaret blinked, lips parting. That's not what I meant. Answer the question. Her jaw trembled. No. The judge leaned back. That will do. When the gavel came down, it sounded like thunder after a drought. Guilty on both counts. Sentence suspended pending restitution and community service, plus an injunction barring her from HOA involvement permanently. Jessica cried softly into my shoulder. Margaret didn't look at me again as they led her out. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Cole, what does justice mean to you?" I stopped on the courthouse steps, the sunlight harsh and clean. "Justice," I said slowly, "is when people stop confusing rules for right and wrong." The microphones caught every word, and for the first time since the chain, the noise felt like something I could breathe in. The verdict didn't feel like victory. It felt like release, the sound of a lock clicking open after you've forgotten what freedom tastes like. When we got home that night, the house was quiet. No reporters, no gawking neighbors. Just the soft hum of the fridge and the faint smell of baby lotion drifting from upstairs. Jessica stood in the doorway, eyes rimmed red but calm. "Is it over?" she asked. I looked past her at the porch rail, at the place where everything had started, and said, "It's beginning." Because justice doesn't end with a verdict. It starts there. The HOA tried to recover. Within a week, the board issued a statement full of polished words like reorganization and renewed trust. They quietly removed Margaret's name from every document, but her shadow clung to that neighborhood like mold. Neighbors who'd once avoided us started waving again, hesitant, guilty. Mr. Howell came over with a pie, muttering, "We should have spoken up sooner." I told him it was fine. It wasn't. But forgiveness is a language you learn slowly. One morning, as I was fixing the porch rail, a woman I barely knew crossed the street. She was holding a baby girl about Noah's age. She said softly, "I used to think Margaret kept us safe." I just nodded. "She didn't," the woman added. "You did." I didn't know how to respond to that. Heroes don't patch fences or rock crying infants at 2 a.m. They don't dream about chains rattling in the dark. They just keep going because someone has to. A week later, a local news piece aired, not sensational, just quiet. A reporter standing under the Maple Grove Estates sign. Headline, HOA Overreach Sparks Reform. They used our porch footage. They blurred Noah's face, but the sound, that single cry, played beneath the reporter's voice like an echo from a different life. That night, the phone didn't stop ringing. Journalists, activists, parents, other HOA residents across the country who'd seen pieces of themselves in our story. One message stood out. A woman from Texas. Her HOA had fined her for inappropriate mourning decorations after her husband's death. Another from Ohio, a veteran threatened with eviction for flying the flag off-center. I listened to all of them. Every voice sounded like Margaret and like me. Anger disguised as order. Silence disguised as civility. I knew then this wasn't just our story. Jessica started sleeping again, though sometimes she'd wake up at 3 a.m. and check the baby monitor twice, just to be sure. We replaced the porch swing. Same style, same color. But this time, I used heavy steel brackets, strong enough to hold both of us. On warm nights, we'd sit there with Noah between us, his tiny fingers grabbing at the chain links of my old badge hanging from my neck. I'd left the force, but part of me still needed to believe the symbol meant something. "Do you miss it?" she asked once. "The job?" "Yeah." I thought about it. The smell of the precinct, the adrenaline, the purpose. I miss feeling like what I did mattered. She touched my hand. It still does. And somehow, that was enough. 3 weeks after sentencing, the district attorney called. "Cole, you've got a following." "I'm not trying to." "Too late," he said. "There's talk about using your case to push HOA accountability legislation. You'd be the face of it." The phrase made me uneasy. The face of it. I wasn't a crusader. I was a man who'd almost lost his son to bureaucracy. But then I remembered those messages. The people who'd been silenced, fined, shamed. And I thought of Margaret's smile as the padlock clicked. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Let's do it." It started small. A petition, a few interviews, a video clip that went viral overnight, me saying, "No rule should ever override basic humanity." Within a month, a local senator introduced the Maple Grove Act. It proposed limits on HOA enforcement powers, mandatory oversight for security clauses, and criminal penalties for abuse of authority. Margaret's name wasn't in the bill, but her ghost was in every line. People online called her HOA Karen. I didn't like that. It made her sound like a joke. What she did wasn't funny. It was deliberate, systemic. Still, her arrest changed something bigger than just our street. One afternoon, I drove past the clubhouse, now closed for renovation. The signboard out front was empty, the flower beds untrimmed. The perfection she'd worshipped was gone, and somehow the neighborhood felt more alive because of it. Kids' bikes leaned crooked against mailboxes. Someone's dog barked too long. A teenager's car stereo thumped low bass. Noise, life, imperfection. Jessica smiled from the passenger seat. I like it better this way. So do I. For the first time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. But peace doesn't erase everything. There are moments when the wind hits the porch just right, when Noah's toy chain clinks against the floor, that I still hear that metallic snap. The moment before rescue. The heartbeat before horror. Trauma has a long half-life, but so does truth. That's what I tell myself when I speak at community meetings now. When parents thank me for standing up, when I stand behind a podium and see fear in their faces, the same fear I used to feel. Fear of crossing the wrong person, of being punished for not fitting in. I tell them this: there's no such thing as small power. Every HOA fine, every policy, every vote, it's a test of whether we remember we're neighbors first. Sometimes I see heads nod. Sometimes I see tears. And sometimes, in the back of the crowd, I imagine Margaret sitting there, clipboard in hand, waiting to correct my grammar. Maybe that's what keeps me sharp. 1 year later, the bill passed. Governor's desk, signature, cameras. They invited me to speak. I looked out at the crowd and saw Jessica holding Noah, who was now toddling on wobbly legs, laughing in the sunlight. I didn't use the speech I'd written. I just spoke from the place where fear used to live. "My son will never remember that chain," I said, "but I will. And I hope you remember, too, not the outrage, but the choice that comes after. Whether you choose control or compassion, order or humanity, that's what defines a community." The applause was soft at first, then stronger. I didn't smile. I just breathed. That night, back home, I sat on the porch swing again. The air was still, the streetlight steady. I took the old chain, cleaned, bagged, labeled Evidence A, and uncoiled it slowly. It wasn't a monster. It was just metal. A tool that could protect or destroy, depending on the hands that held it. I looped it once around the porch post, not to bind, but to remind. Jessica stepped outside, barefoot, holding Noah. "What are you doing?" "Making sure we don't forget." She leaned against me, and together we rocked in silence. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of a baby crying somewhere down the street, not in fear, but in life. I smiled. "That's a good sound." She nodded. "Yeah, it is." The porch light flickered once, then steadied. When people ask me what justice feels like, I tell them it's not fireworks or fanfare. It's a quiet porch, a baby's laugh, a chain rusting peacefully in the open air, never to be used again. Because justice isn't revenge. It's making sure no one else ever has to fight the same battle you did. And if that's all my story does, if one parent somewhere sleeps easier because of it, then maybe, finally, the noise was worth it. Comment below what justice means to you. The morning after the bill passed, I woke before the sun. The house was still, the world outside tinted blue, that strange color between night and day when everything feels like a held breath. Jessica and Noah were asleep upstairs. The baby monitor's soft hiss filled the silence like ocean waves. I walked out to the porch, coffee in hand, and sat on the swing. The chain links creaked gently, but it didn't sound like fear anymore. It sounded like memory. For months after the trial, I avoided this spot. It felt haunted. Every creak was her voice, every gust of wind a reminder. But now, the porch was just wood and air, a place to sit, to watch, to breathe. I looked at the rail, the one I'd replaced and repainted myself. A small dent still showed where the padlock had scraped the paint. I never sanded it out. I wanted to remember. Because forgetting is how things happen again. People ask what happened to Margaret. She served 90 days under house arrest, a year of probation, a fine. She moved away quietly. No interviews, no apologies. But sometimes I wonder if she ever looks back on that house, on the street she ruled like a fiefdom, and thinks about what she did. I don't wish her pain. I wish her understanding, because that's the real difference between order and justice. Order wants silence. Justice wants understanding. A few months after the law passed, I was invited to speak at a community policing conference in D.C. The title of the panel was Restoring Trust Between Power and People. Funny, I thought, how that word power always shows up before people, like we still haven't learned the right order. When it was my turn, I didn't bring slides or stats. I brought the tag, the one that had hung from the padlock. I held it up in front of 100 officers, lawyers, and legislators and said, "This tag says, no unattended items on property." The person who wrote this thought she was doing good. She thought control would keep her world safe. But control without compassion is just fear wearing a badge. You could hear the chairs creak. No one coughed. I let the silence sit there, heavy and honest. Then I said, "The scariest thing I've learned isn't how far people will go to do harm. It's how far they'll go believing they're right." Afterward, people lined up to shake my hand. But what stayed with me was a young officer who approached last. He couldn't have been more than 25. His eyes were wet when he said, "My dad was HOA president when I was a kid. He made people cry over mailbox colors. I never understood why until now I told him, then you already broke the cycle." Back home, life settled into a quiet rhythm. Noah learned to crawl, then walk. His first word wasn't mama or dada, it was light. He'd point to the porch lamp every evening when it flicked on, giggling like it was a miracle. Maybe to him it was. Sometimes I'd hold him there on the porch, both of us bathed in that soft glow, and I'd think about how something so simple, one working light, could mean safety to someone who's lived through darkness. Jessica started painting again. She said colors helped her forget the gray of fear. Our walls bloomed with her art, sunflowers, beaches, a portrait of Noah asleep. She painted me once, too, sitting on the porch, staring out at the street, coffee in hand. She titled it, The Watch. I didn't tell her, but when I looked at that painting, I saw what she really captured. Not a man keeping guard, but a man finally learning how to let go. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typed, "I watched your interview. I'm sorry for what happened. I was wrong. ML. No signature, just those initials. Jessica found me standing in the doorway with it. Is it her? I think so. What are you going to do?" "Nothing," I said. She finally said what mattered. I folded the paper and slipped it behind the frame of the watch. Not to hide it, but to remind myself that change doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it's just 3 sentences whispered too late, but whispered all the same. The following spring, the neighborhood elected a new HOA board. Younger faces, kinder eyes. They knocked on our door with a new welcome basket. Bread, flowers, and a note that simply said, "We're glad you stayed." Jessica cried when she read it. I laughed softly because the irony was perfect. The same institution that had broken us now wanted to rebuild around us. But maybe that's what healing looks like. The same tools, used differently. On Noah's first birthday, we invited everyone. Neighbors, officers, even the new board. I set up the grill, Jessica baked the cake, and we turned that cursed porch into a celebration. Midway through the party, Mr. Howell raised a toast. His voice cracked halfway through, but no one cared. "To the Coles," he said, "for reminding us that rules are supposed to protect people, not punish them." Everyone clapped. I just smiled and looked down at my son, frosting on his cheek, eyes wide, laughing like he didn't know the world could ever be cruel. Maybe that's what redemption looks like. Not the absence of scars, but the decision to live with them. That night, after everyone left, Jessica and I sat on the swing again. The sky was velvet dark, the kind of quiet only earned after surviving noise. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked softly. "Sometimes." "Why don't we?" I looked out at the street, at the houses that once felt like threats and now looked like stories. Because running wouldn't mean healing. Staying does. She smiled. "I like that answer." Noah stirred in her arms, half asleep. I brushed his hair back and whispered, "You're safe, buddy. Always." And I meant it, not as a promise against danger, but as a vow to keep fighting for the kind of world where safety isn't a privilege guarded by fear. A month later, I visited Margaret's old house one last time. The new owners were repainting. The porch had been stripped bare. The iron railings she'd once measured with military precision were gone. The man painting the trim waved. "You're the officer, right?" Heard the story. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Crazy thing. My wife's on the board now. We're making changes," I nodded. "Good ones, I hope." "The best ones," he said with a grin. "We're starting with compassion." I smiled all the way home. At sunset, I walked the block with Noah on my shoulders. He kept pointing at things, birds, cars, lights, narrating his world like a poet learning words for the first time. When we reached our house, he pointed at the porch rail and said, "Safe." It stopped me cold. "Yeah," I whispered, "safe." He didn't know the history. He didn't know the chain or the trial or the weight of that word. But somehow, he said exactly what I needed to hear. I lifted him down, held him close, and realized something I hadn't before. The opposite of fear isn't courage. It's love. Now, whenever someone sends me a message about their own battle, an unjust HOA, a corrupt landlord, an unfair system, I tell them what I learned the hard way. You don't fight people. You fight patterns. You fight silence. You fight the idea that someone else's comfort matters more than your child's safety. Because in the end, this story isn't about one bad neighbor or one corrupt rule. It's about how easily we let small authority become cruelty, and how powerful it is when even one person says, "No more." I still keep the chain. It hangs on the wall of my garage, coiled like a question mark. Whenever I look at it, I remember the night it clinked against my porch and the scream that followed. But more than that, I remember what came after. The noise, the truth, the change. And I remember that even the strongest chains rust when you drag them into the light. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever felt trapped by someone else's power, remember this. You are not the problem for wanting peace. You are not the villain for saying enough. And sometimes the smallest act of defiance, a porch swing rebuilt, a voice that refuses to stay quiet, can turn into a story that saves someone else. Because freedom doesn't always come with sirens. Sometimes it starts with a cry, a chain, a father who refuses to let either define his child's world. HOA Karen chained my newborn baby to our porch. She had no idea I'm a police officer. That's how people tell it online. But if I had to rename it, I'd call it this: the day we relearned what a community is. Because that's the real ending, not the courtroom, not the law. Just a family, a porch, and a quiet that finally means peace. Comment below what justice means to you.